What if you could choose the exact moment of your death? No more accidents, no illness creeping up in the dark. No aging, no hospitals, no sudden farewells. Just one decision, yours alone, to end your life whenever you choose. Not a second earlier. Not a second later. Now imagine an entire world built on that choice. A reality where death isn't a fear, it's an option. In this world, the concept of dying changes forever. No one passes away unexpectedly. No one fades from age or gets taken by disease unless they choose to be. The power of mortality rests entirely in human hands, and it's granted to every person on earth the moment they come of age. At first, this sounds like liberation. But then comes the deeper realization. What happens to society when death becomes a decision? What happens to family, relationships, healthcare, and even love, when everyone knows exactly how much time they have left, if any? Let's dive into a world where no one dies unless they want to, and where living forever might come with consequences no one expected. In this world, death is no longer an accident, a curse, or an uncontrollable force. It's a button, a mental switch embedded in the human consciousness. Every individual, upon reaching a specific age, let's say 18, gains full autonomous control over their mortality. One thought, one moment of resolve, and life ends instantly, painlessly, and with full awareness. Until then, they cannot die. No war, no disease, no disaster, no injury can override this internal sovereignty. Bullets don't kill. Cancer doesn't spread. Natural disasters may destroy buildings, but not the bodies within, unless someone chooses, in that moment, to let go. The world quickly adapts. Insurance companies go extinct. Hospitals become proactive wellness centers. Terminal illnesses are reclassified as optional exits. Suicide hotlines evolve into death counseling services. Not to prevent, but to guide. Conversations shift from "I don't want to die" to "When do I think I should?" Death becomes less about tragedy and more about timing. This power creates a strange kind of stability. No one fears the reaper because he only comes when called. People grow up knowing that their life is truly theirs, from the first breath to the very last one. But with that freedom comes a profound weight. When is the right time to go? Some people choose to live 100 years. Some choose 500. A few, driven by ambition, grief, or curiosity, press the mental end button before even turning 30. Others keep going, year after year, building lives with no endpoint in sight. And still, some quietly decide never to decide. Trapped in indecision, knowing that even immortality comes with its own form of anxiety. Society reacts by creating death registries, support groups, and entire philosophies dedicated to optimal timing. New career paths arise. Exit consultants, lifespan strategists, and philosophers of finality, all offering guidance to those struggling with the choice. The world's culture shifts rapidly. No longer is the fear of death a motivating factor in achievement. Artists no longer race against time. Scientists don't retire. Families are no longer broken by early deaths, but now by the differing philosophies of when to leave. And as every person quietly carries this inner button, conversations around mortality change forever. Because when death is something you choose, it also becomes something you must eventually face, not as a surprise, but as a mirror. But as society settles into this new normal, deeper consequences begin to emerge. What happens to hospitals, medicine, and entire industries built around fighting death when death has stopped fighting back? Almost overnight, the global healthcare system faces an identity crisis. Hospitals, once seen as sanctuaries against death, lose their urgency. Emergency rooms no longer overflow with trauma patients. ICS sit half empty. The very idea of emergency becomes obsolete because nothing is truly fatal anymore unless someone chooses for it to be. Terminal illness, rebranded as chronic condition management. Cancer becomes a thing you can live with indefinitely. A brain aneurysm, a heart attack, none of it matters if you haven't mentally triggered your death. Paramedics arrive not to save your life, but to keep you comfortable while you decide what you want to do with it. Health insurance becomes a relic. If no one dies by accident, who needs coverage? Policies vanish, premiums disappear, medical bankruptcies evaporate. The pharmaceutical industry pivots from life-extending treatments to enhancement, luxury upgrades, and anti-boredom drugs. The world of medicine becomes about optimization, not survival. Hospitals evolve into life extension hubs. People don't show up to fight off death. They show up to upgrade their bodies, extend their productivity, or fix the minor aches of infinite living. The focus shifts from saving lives to maintaining infinite potential. Retirement plans become jokes. Who retires when they could live for 300 more years? Pension systems collapse. Social Security becomes unsustainable. Governments are forced to overhaul every system built on the idea that people die. Age-based policies shatter under the weight of this new reality. Meanwhile, certain medical fields vanish altogether. Oncology becomes irrelevant. Gerontology fades. Hospice care becomes optional and often ceremonial. Even organ donation becomes meaningless. Why harvest organs when no one needs replacements under threat of death? But this seemingly perfect world hides something darker beneath the surface. Mental health professionals see a sharp increase in a new kind of anxiety. Eternity disorder? People aren't afraid of dying. They're afraid of not knowing when to die. Therapists are overwhelmed, not with depression, but with patients paralyzed by their freedom. Religious hospitals begin offering guided transitions, spiritually informed exit sessions for those ready to let go. Some countries pass legislation requiring mandatory counseling before someone can make the final choice. Others go the opposite route, promoting death as a right with no red tape, no paperwork, just a whisper of will. In richer nations, luxury exit clinics open with elegance and ceremony. Some offer simulated afterlives for a final experience. Others promise euphoric send-offs in dreamlike rooms, surrounded by art, scent, and sound tailored to your memories. Even in the poorest corners of the globe, the power to choose death remains universal. But it's there that we see a growing imbalance, where resources are limited, where food is scarce, and suffering high. People begin choosing to end their lives not from freedom, but from despair. The line between autonomy and quiet genocide begins to blur. Healthcare no longer asks, "How can we keep you alive?" It now asks, "How long do you want to live, and why?" But with death no longer inevitable, population begins to surge, and fast. When no one is dying but babies are still being born, what happens to the world when space, resources, and time all start running out? At first, the new world is euphoric. Death is optional. Life is open-ended. But then, the numbers start climbing. Without natural death to regulate population growth, Earth's human count skyrockets. Birth rates remain stable, at least for a while, because people still want children, still want legacy. But without the balancing act of mortality, each new birth adds to an ever-growing, never-shrinking crowd. By the end of the first century of death autonomy, humanity doubles, then triples. Urban centers swell into megacities. Skyscrapers give way to mile-high arcologies. Vertical cities packed with layer after layer of human life. Forests vanish, oceans are colonized. Deserts become glass cities powered by solar panels. Even Antarctica isn't off limits anymore. Space colonization is no longer ambition. It's necessity. Governments begin to panic. For the first time in history, overpopulation isn't a looming threat. It's a present catastrophe. Basic resources, water, food, clean air, begin to falter. Supply chains are overwhelmed by sheer demand. Technological advances slow, not because intelligence has dropped, but because the problem has changed. It's no longer about discovery. It's about accommodation. And this is where things turn cold. Some nations begin incentivizing honorable exits. They glorify voluntary death as a patriotic act. Propaganda spreads. Give room to the next generation. Hero statues are built for those who chose to end their lives in service of the species. Documentaries and media glorify mass departures. In some cases, the line between suggestion and pressure becomes dangerously thin. New social movements form. The Eternals, individuals who refuse to ever choose death, often gathering in closed, self-sufficient communities. The Leavers, those who believe that finite lives are more meaningful and advocate for a maximum lifespan, even trying to legally limit immortality. The Spiralists, people who advocate that once you've created too many memories, lived through too many eras, or reached a certain psychological saturation, it is your duty to exit before your mind erodes. International summits are held, not to prevent war, but to coordinate space usage and lifespans. Earth's population reaches 30 billion, then 50, then 80, and yet people still aren't choosing to die. Why should they? There's always something new to see, someone new to meet, some reason to stay alive just one more year. Meanwhile, families grow infinitely long. You no longer meet your great-grandparents through faded photos. They're there, alive, next door, raising their 10th generation of descendants. Entire nations are populated by their original founders. Social dynamics fracture. Authority based on age becomes laughable. Why listen to someone just because they've been alive for 900 years? And for those who can't find space in the real world, the digital realm offers solace. Many begin uploading themselves into virtual realities, still alive technically, but no longer requiring space, food, or material care. A new kind of citizen is born, the ghost residents, those who've chosen to live out eternity in code. Eventually, a bitter truth emerges. Earth can no longer sustain everyone. Not because we don't know how to live, but because no one is willing to leave. And as the planet buckles under the weight of its own immortals, a deeper shift begins. One that strikes at the core of human identity, our relationships, families, and the very idea of love in a world without endings. In a world where death is no longer a certainty, love becomes complicated. Marriage vows, till death do us part, lose their finality. The idea of forever once meant growing old together, passing peacefully in time. Now, it could mean sharing a life with someone for hundreds of years, even millennia. And for many, that's too much to bear. Emotional exhaustion becomes real. People begin to split, not from betrayal or tragedy, but from sheer longevity. New relationship models emerge to adapt. Rotational partnerships, where couples commit for a century, then reassess. Legacy couples who agree to stay together only until their children reach adulthood. Time-bound soulmates who believe love is most beautiful when it's temporary, and therefore meaningful. Romantic timelines aren't the only things shifting. Family trees stop branching and begin spiraling. Generational boundaries blur. You could meet your great-granddaughter and still look younger than her. A single living ancestor might span 20 generations of descendants, playing the role of mentor, financier, historian, and occasional nuisance. This brings profound economic and cultural complications. Inheritance becomes a logistical nightmare. Who gets what? When the person passing it down refuses to die. Some older immortals amass impossible wealth, holding economic power over entire bloodlines. Others renounce material goods altogether, instead passing down philosophies as legacy. Parenthood becomes its own philosophical battlefield. Some people want children every few decades, building sprawling lineages over centuries. Others decide that without death, reproduction is irresponsible. A radical movement rises. The Last Born Collective. Parents who vow that their child will be their final contribution to the gene pool before choosing to exit shortly after. Rituals evolve, too. Birthday parties become milestones not of age, but of intent. Will you choose your year this time? Becomes a common question among friends and family. 100th birthday means little when you've known people who've lived for 4 times as long. Longevity fatigue begins to set in. The longer someone lives, the more detached they become from emotional immediacy. They've seen wars rise and fall, cities built and leveled, lovers come and go. Eventually, the novelty of existence begins to fade. Legacy changes shape. In the old world, we chased greatness because time was short. Now, there is all the time in the world, and that makes urgency die a quiet death. People no longer rush to write the novel, build the business, or make a mark on history. There's always tomorrow, next year, next century. Some try to reignite meaning through death ceremonies, celebrations of final choice. Friends and family gather, not to mourn a life taken too soon, but to honor a life fully lived and willingly ended. These moments bring back a sense of closure the world has been starving for. Still, there's tension. A daughter might beg her 300-year-old father to finally let go, so she can inherit the family land and pass it to her own kids. A mother might choose to end her life before she meets her great-grandchildren, believing her presence dilutes the strength of future generations. Human connection becomes diluted by sheer scale. When everyone stays, no one ever truly leaves, and without death, many begin to wonder, can we ever truly let go of each other? Or are we trapped in love that has lost its shape? But as society wrestles with the emotional gravity of eternity, another force begins to shift, one that governs behavior, punishment, and morality. What does justice look like when a criminal can choose never to die? In a world where no one dies unless they choose to, punishment takes on a terrifying new dimension. Capital punishment becomes obsolete. The death penalty can't be enforced, only suggested. You can sentence someone to death, but if they don't choose it, they live forever. This forces justice systems to reinvent themselves. No more executions. No accidental deaths during arrests. No suicide by cop. The entire structure collapses under the weight of autonomy. So how do you punish someone who's functionally immortal? Prison becomes a sentence, not of years, but of centuries. Life imprisonment suddenly means exactly what it says. A criminal who refuses to die might serve 500, 1,000, even 3,000 years behind bars. Correctional institutions become near-eternal facilities, built not for rehabilitation, but for containment. Generational staff turnover becomes a logistical nightmare. Imagine supervising a murderer who's been incarcerated since before your great-grandparents were born, and who shows no sign of ever choosing death. Some criminals find ways to turn the system inside out. Serial killers who were once sentenced to death simply opt to live. Worse, they sometimes become legends, immortal outlaws who exist as living testaments to justice's failure. Their very existence is an insult to the people they harmed. To address this, society introduces new layers of judicial pressure, death incentives, massive monetary rewards to a criminal's family, accessible only after their voluntary departure. Exit mandates. Ethically controversial policies where a convict's life is made as psychologically unbearable as possible in hopes they choose to end it. Stasis chambers, freezing criminals in a timeless state. An eternal pause that bypasses death without granting freedom. Debates rage. Is it ethical to psychologically torment someone into death? If someone has absolute control over their mortality, does society have any right to influence that decision? Is a century of imprisonment enough? Is 10? Meanwhile, new forms of crime emerge, psychological coercion toward death. Imagine someone manipulating their partner into choosing to die, or cult leaders orchestrating mass exits disguised as spiritual awakenings. Legal frameworks scramble to keep up. Entire departments are formed just to monitor non-physical homicide. Deaths triggered not by force, but by influence. The concept of assisted death is rebranded, normalized, and even commercialized. Tech startups emerge with beautifully designed exit pods, complete with immersive music, lighting, and memories playing in real time. Death becomes a service, and with that, a commodity. The line between dignity and market exploitation grows thin. Religious and ethical lines fracture even further. Some belief systems claim that choosing death is a sacred right. Others see it as spiritual failure, a shortcut away from growth. Some cultures begin to demand mandatory minimum lifespans. One must live at least 80 years before even thinking of an exit. Others celebrate the first death at 21, calling it a life flash. A brief life, lived on full throttle, and exited before it decays. And then comes the darkest twist of all: murder by choice. Imagine a person persuading someone to willingly die for love, loyalty, or manipulation. Legally, no force was used. Technically, the person chose to end their life, but morally, it's a gray zone no society is prepared to navigate. Justice, once rooted in retribution and deterrence, now finds itself helpless in the face of absolute personal sovereignty. A person can steal harm, ruin lives, and then vanish, quietly choosing their own end, escaping trial, escaping consequences, and escaping memory. But for many, the answers they seek don't come from laws or prisons, they come from faith. And in a world where death is no longer mysterious, the ancient questions grow louder. What does the afterlife mean when you can walk into it on command? When death becomes a choice, faith is forced to evolve or fracture. For millennia, religion offered humanity a kind of comfort. That death, inevitable and unknowable, was a doorway to something more. Paradise, rebirth, judgment, peace. But now, that doorway stands wide open, and you hold the key. Not God, not fate. You, this alone, sends shockwaves through every spiritual institution on earth. Some major religions declare the choice of death to be a divine gift, an act of ultimate free will, ordained by the Creator to test the soul's readiness. Others denounce it as heresy, an unforgivable act of playing God. Suddenly, faith becomes less about how you live and more about when and if you should die. New sects emerge. The waiters, who believe only a divinely inspired vision should dictate the timing of one's death. Until then, you must endure. The crossers, who see death as a threshold to divine truth. An advocate for early exits to fast-track their union with the afterlife. The infinite path, who argue that death is unnecessary if the soul can achieve enlightenment within life through centuries of reflection and experience. Old rituals are reimagined. Funerals give way to exit ceremonies, events designed by the departing individual themselves. Some are grand, multi-day festivals with music, farewells, and speeches from across generations. Others are quiet, sacred, and deeply private. Death is no longer a surprise, it's a scheduled gathering. Some cultures begin to idolize the perfect exit, dying on a mountaintop at dawn, or surrounded by family at the exact moment a comet passes overhead. Death becomes artistic. Some spend years planning theirs. A few delay it for centuries, perfecting the exact final note of their life. But not all deaths are beautiful. In communities devastated by poverty or oppression, the power to choose becomes a dangerous burden. Spiritual leaders must counsel people out of making a decision born from pain, not readiness. And in those places, new rituals emerge. Rites of perseverance. Celebrating each year someone chooses not to die, honoring resilience as sacred. Meanwhile, the meaning of the afterlife itself begins to change. When anyone can cross the threshold at any time, a new obsession is born. What actually happens next? The scientific world races to explore death. Labs are built around controlled exits, hoping to monitor consciousness as it ends. Philosophers ask, if billions eventually walk through the veil on their own terms, what if they all come back with nothing? Or worse, what if some of them come back with something? Reports spread, stories of those who almost crossed, then pulled back. Visions, patterns, messages. The line between theology and neuroscience begins to blur. Is the afterlife real, or just a hallucination before the mind ends? People begin dying on live streams, broadcasting their final moments in hopes of proving what's beyond. Religions capitalize and adapt. Heaven clubs offer elite transitions into what they claim are blissful death states. Digital churches promise simulated paradise if you upload your consciousness instead of choosing a traditional death. Some extremists believe that the world of the living is the real hell, and to exit is the only salvation. And for those who fear being forgotten, new rituals emerge. Legacy encoding becomes common, uploading your memories into digital archives where loved ones can interact with your personality, voice, and even your AI reconstructed thoughts long after you're gone. In a way, no one ever truly dies anymore, just transfers. Still, beneath all the theology, rituals, and innovation, a deeper spiritual question haunts the human soul. If you can choose your death, does it mean less or infinitely more? But what happens when this power isn't just personal? What if millions choose to die on the same day, triggering the most dramatic moment in modern human history? It starts as a whisper, a viral post, philosophical essay, a digital sermon titled The Beautiful Goodbye. At first, it's just another fringe idea floating around the net. But then it spreads fast. Within weeks, it's trending globally. What if we all left together? The premise is simple, almost poetic. On a designated day, at a designated hour, millions would choose to die simultaneously. Not in protest, not in despair, but as a gift to humanity. To make space, to restore balance. To give meaning back to a life that had become too long, too weightless. They call it the Exodus. At first, no one takes it seriously. Governments dismiss it. Psychologists call it mass suggestion. Religious leaders argue over its sanctity or sinfulness. But then, the pledges begin. An online counter goes live. First 10,000, then 1 million, 10 million. Names from every country, every background. Some are centuries old, ready to let go. Others are young and idealistic, convinced that their death will be a noble act. A few simply believe they've lived enough. The world holds its breath. Preparations unfold in eerie coordination. Death ceremonies are scheduled. Family members plan farewells. News outlets set up live coverage. Activist groups try to intervene. Memorial sites crash under server load. But no force, no threat, no law can stop those who have made their decision. Because in this world, death cannot be taken, only given. And then the day arrives. Across every time zone, screens go black. Streets go quiet. At exactly the agreed-upon moment, millions of individuals across the globe simultaneously choose to die. No violence, no chaos. Just stillness. The impact is immediate and devastating. Economies lurch. Key industries lose decades of expertise in minutes. Entire companies, communities, and even small towns become hollowed out. Some families lose all their elders. Some children become orphans. Entire regions go into mourning. For the first time, the power of death choice is felt on a global scale. Not as individual sovereignty, but as collective force. Memorial walls are constructed. Digital archives preserve their final words, messages, and artistic expressions. The Exodus becomes a global holiday, a moment of silence each year. Schools teach it as history. Philosophers study it as ideology. Politicians cite it as both warning and inspiration. But not everyone sees it as noble. Some survivors feel abandoned, angry that their loved ones made that choice. Others believe the event created a dangerous precedent. Conspiracy theories spread. Was it really voluntary? Was something orchestrated behind the scenes? A psychological virus, coordinated manipulation. Religions fracture again. Some elevate the Exodus participants to sainthood. Others condemn the act as spiritual suicide. Governments begin drafting new policies. Exit caps, final will reviews, public health monitoring. Death has become both personal right and public issue. But for many, the aftermath is something else entirely. A vacuum. A silence. A realization that while you have the power to live forever, you're now one of the few who still do. Some survivors begin to ask questions they never did before. Why am I still here? When will I be ready? Will there be another Exodus? And in quiet corners of the world, new countdowns begin. Unofficial, unconfirmed, but unmistakably familiar. Because when death is a button that anyone can press, all it takes is someone to whisper, "Let's press it together." But in the end, after the ceremonies fade and the movements dissolve, one question remains, the one that lingers in the silence of eternity. If you could choose the day you die, would you? So now, it's your turn to think about it. In this world where every breath you take is a choice, where death never comes unless you summon it, what kind of life would you live? Would you chase endless years, mastering art, learning every language, watching the world reshape itself a dozen times over? Would you hold your loved ones close for as long as time allowed, until they one by one chose to leave you behind? Or would you choose to go out on your own terms, to make your exit while your story still has weight, while the pages still feel fresh and the memories haven't faded into dust? Maybe you'd want one final sunrise, one last letter, one perfect note of music echoing through a silent room. Maybe you'd choose to die the day your first grandchild is born, or the moment you finally forgave someone or yourself. Or maybe you'd never choose at all. Maybe you'd live in fear of the decision. Not because you want to live forever, but because you're afraid you might accidentally get it right. Because in a world where death is no longer inevitable, it becomes something else entirely. An art, a statement, a mirror. Some would use it to prove their philosophy, others to express their love, a few to run from their pain. But all of them, one way or another, would eventually have to look at that moment and make the choice that defines them more than any other. Not how they lived, but when and why they chose to end it. So here's the question no one wants to answer, but everyone carries. If you could choose your final day, down to the exact moment, would you ever be ready to press the button? This is the power no human has ever had. But in this world, everyone must carry. And maybe that's the truest burden of all. In this hypothetical world, death is no longer a force of nature. It's a personal decision. And with that shift, everything else crumbles and reforms. Our systems, our families, our ethics, our very sense of purpose. No longer bound by ticking clocks, humanity would be liberated, but also haunted. We'd be free to live endlessly, but we'd also be forced to decide when enough is enough. Every sunrise would be a gift, yes, but also a test. And every person would carry a question in their chest like a slow-burning fuse. Am I done yet? It's a world where death isn't feared, but quietly studied. Not chased, but eventually invited. And for all the chaos and beauty that might bring, one thing becomes clear. In a reality where life never ends by accident, the only thing scarier than dying might be never choosing to. If this video made you stop and think, really think about your own life, your relationships, and what you'd do if you had full control over your ending, then don't just scroll past. Like this video to help us keep creating deep, thought-provoking journeys like this. Subscribe for more mind-bending scenarios that challenge everything you think you know about reality. And comment below with the one question we all fear to answer. If you could choose your last day, would you?